In a valley abandoned by time and war, one man holds a key to a secret no one was meant to uncover. Every shadow hides a truth, every heartbeat carries danger, and a single choice could change everything. Will Captain Arlon Hayes survive the test of courage, or will the secrets of Operation Iron Resolve consume him? Join the journey into a mission of mystery, betrayal, and a revelation that could shake the world. The wind moved like a restless tide across the barren ridge, carrying the taste of dust and steel into Captain Arlon Hayes' lungs. He stood alone at the overlook, his boots firm against the gritty earth, as if the ground itself waited for his decision. The sky above him held a color that lay somewhere between bruised violet and the last ember of daylight, and it pressed against his thoughts with a heavy stillness. Arlon adjusted the strap of his field pack, feeling the dull presence of the encrypted tablet buried inside. It contained the coordinates for Operation Iron Resolve, a mission whispered about behind closed doors for months, and now placed entirely on his shoulders. The responsibility clung to him with the weight of unseen chains, tightening around his breath with every passing moment. Below the ridge stretched a valley of abandoned structures, stripped bare by years of conflict. Broken windows glinted like cold eyes watching him from the shadows. A distant metallic creak rolled across the empty plain, and Arlon felt the fine hairs on his arms rise. Nothing moved, yet the silence carried the distinct presence of someone unseen and waiting. For a moment he closed his eyes, allowing the memory of Command's final briefing to surface. The director's voice had been low, steady, and unervingly calm. He had said that the mission required a leader who could walk into uncertainty without breaking under the pressure of unseen truths. Arlon had agreed before he fully understood the scope of what he was accepting. He shifted his weight and gazed toward the old transmission tower that marked the first checkpoint. Its skeletal frame pierced the skyline like a warning, and its rusted metal groaned under the touch of the shifting wind. Arlon felt the terrain pressing on him, as if the land carried the remnants of every story that had ended here. A faint tremor pulsed beneath his feet, too subtle for an explosion, yet unmistakably deliberate. He crouched instinctively, scanning the valley floor for movement. His heartbeat marked the seconds with steady force, each thud echoing sharper in his ears. The tremor came again, stronger this time, sending a ripple of tension through his spine. He straightened, tightening his gloves with slow precision. There was no turning back. He had accepted this mission for reasons he seldom admitted aloud. It was not loyalty alone. It was a need to confront the truth about what had been hidden from him for years. He began his descent from the ridge, his boots pressing into the uneven slope. With every step, the world around him felt heavier, as if the valley recognized him and remembered his presence. The shadows thickened between the scattered ruins, gathering in narrow corners like living things. As he reached the valley floor, he noticed fresh marks in the dirt. They were not left by military vehicles or wandering civilians. They were sharper, cleaner, and belonged to something precise and deliberate. A chill spread through his chest as he knelt to examine them. A single thought formed, quiet yet undeniable. Someone had arrived ahead of him. He slowly rose, lifting his gaze toward the transmission tower. A faint glimmer appeared near its midpoint, almost imperceptible but clearly intentional. It flickered once and then vanished. Arlon felt a steady breath fill his lungs, deep and grounding. The mission had already begun, and he was no longer the only player stepping onto the field. He moved forward into the narrowing corridor of ruins, the air thickening with the pull of an unseen presence. Every instinct sharpened, and every memory of prior battles stirred within him like embers catching new flame. Somewhere beyond the fractured buildings, beyond the tower and the silent roads, the first piece of truth waited for him. But with each advancing step, he sensed that the truth would not resemble anything he had been prepared to face. And the valley, with all its abandoned echoes, seemed to know that too. Arlon advanced deeper into the valley, the cold sting of the air growing sharper as the broken structures closed around him. Loose debris shifted beneath his boots, creating a muted crunch that echoed between the fractured walls. The silence carried a rhythm of its own, almost as if the valley breathed with him, exhaling a slow and ancient warning. His gloved hand brushed against the edge of a collapsed doorway, and flakes of rust drifted downward like fragile embers. The air inside the ruin smelled of old fire and forgotten metal. He stepped across the threshold, letting the dim light settle over the space. A narrow corridor stretched inward, lit only by the faint glow of distant dusk. Long cracks ran along the walls, branching like thin veins across pale concrete. Arlon felt a shift in temperature with every step, as though the building kept its own memory of fear preserved in cold pockets of air. He paused when he reached a widened chamber that once served as a communications hub. Thick cables hung from the ceiling like severed lifelines, swaying gently with the pull of the wind that seeped through shattered glass. A half-buried monitor sparked with intermittent static, casting brief pulses of white across the floor. Arlon's eyes narrowed when he saw the imprint beside the monitor. A single boot mark, clearer than anything he had seen outside. The tread was unfamiliar, slightly angular, and heavier than standard field gear. It faced the direction of a stairwell that spiraled downward into the sublevels. His breath steadied, but tension settled in his shoulders like a tightening harness. He stepped onto the first stair, letting the darkness swallow his presence. The air below carried a damp, metallic scent, as if water and machinery had been left to rot together in the shadows. Halfway down, he stopped. A faint hum vibrated beneath the concrete, rhythmic and unervingly calm. It was not the sound of a generator, and not the distant tremor of seismic activity. It sounded intentional, measured, as if something waited for him to descend just a little further. Arlon pressed on, allowing the dim stairwell to guide him into a cavernous chamber lit by a single strip bulb. The light flickered in a slow pulse, revealing the outlines of crates, disassembled consoles, and tangled wires. But one detail stole his attention immediately. A steel door stood at the opposite end of the chamber, slightly open. A thin line of white light spilled through the crack, cutting across the dusty floor like a blade. On the wall beside it, pressed into the grit and dirt, he saw a smeared handprint. The mark was recent, dragged downward with force, as though someone had struggled to remain standing. Arlon's pulse increased, steady yet intense. He approached the door in deliberate steps, studying the thin light with focused caution. The humming sound grew louder, shaped now into a low vibration that resonated through his ribcage. He reached for the door, nudging it open with the side of his arm. The hinges groaned softly, releasing a breath of warmer air that clung to his skin when it touched him. The room beyond held a circular structure made of polished metal embedded into the floor. Wires fed into it from every direction, connecting consoles that displayed no readable text, only flickering shapes and patterns that felt unervingly alive. A faint mist hovered above the device, shimmering as if reacting to his presence. Arlon stepped closer, feeling an odd pressure settle at the base of his skull. It was not painful, but it pushed against his thoughts with deliberate weight. He stared at the shifting patterns on the console, recognizing none of them, yet sensing a familiarity he could not explain. Then he noticed something else. A small metallic object lay near the device, half hidden beneath a scrap of cloth. He knelt and picked it up carefully. It was a pendant, a simple, worn piece of metal shaped like an old military insignia. But the symbol engraved on it was one he had not seen in years, one tied to a mission he had been told never existed, a mission that had vanished from every official record. A quiet tightness formed his chest as realization threaded itself into his thoughts. Someone from that erased past had been here, and not long ago. As he turned the pendant in his hand, the humming intensified. The device on the floor reacted, glowing brighter, as thin streams of white light pulsed outward like ripples on water. Arlon stepped back, his instincts rising in warning. The circular structure began to shift, its surface rearranged in slow, deliberate movements, revealing a second layer beneath the metal. He watched the patterns on the consoles reorganize into a format that almost resembled a map, marked with coordinates he had never been briefed about. The humming reached a steady, powerful resonance that filled the chamber. Arlon's breath tightened as he realized that the machine was not simply activating. It was responding to him. A thin column of light shot upward from the center of the device, stopping just short of the ceiling. The air trembled around it, charged with a force that made the loose dust lift from the floor. Arlon took one slow step forward, drawn by the impossible. But before he could reach the edge of the light, a soft sound drifted from behind him. It was barely audible, a gentle shift of fabric against concrete. Someone else was in the chamber, Arlon turned sharply, muscles tightening, eyes searching the dim corners. There was no one visible, yet the presence was unmistakable. A shadow shifted near the stairwell, moving with silent purpose. It paused, watching him with an attention that felt unnervingly familiar. Arlon lifted the pendant in his hand, letting it catch the faint light. The shadow froze, reacting to the symbol with a subtle stillness that carried both recognition and warning. For a moment, the air between them held a fragile tension, balanced on the edge of revelation. Arlon opened his mouth to speak, but the ground beneath him shuddered. The device surged, and a column of light widened abruptly with force that swept through the chamber like a silent storm. The shadow vanished. The consoles flickered violently, and the chamber plunged into a rapid shift of light and motion as something inside the machine prepared to activate fully. Arlon steadied himself, lifted his arm to shield his eyes. He braced for the moment the machine would reveal what it had been hiding. But the revelation did not come. The light pulsed once, twice, and then held itself in a perfect, waiting stillness, as if the machine required one final action, one final choice. Arlon lowered his arm slowly, standing at the threshold of an answer that hovered just beyond his reach, and the device waited for him to take the step that would decide everything that followed. Arlon stood frozen, the pendant heavy in his hand, its cold metal biting into his palm as the column of light held the room in suspended tension. The humming of the device vibrated through the floor, through his boots, into the marrow of his bones. Every instinct screamed for caution, yet every thought pulled him forward, toward the unknown that had waited decades for this moment. The shadow remained just beyond the stairwell, subtle but deliberate, like a mark left by an unseen hand. It was a presence that knew him, and he knew, deep in the center of his chest, that it would not reveal itself until he made the first move. Every second stretched into eternity. He stepped forward, slow, deliberate, his boots scraping lightly against the concrete, creating a rhythm that seemed to mirror the pulse of the machine. The light column reacted, growing brighter, almost as if testing his resolve. Arlon reached the edge of the circular device and traced a finger along its smooth, metallic surface. The hum intensified into a low, resonant tone that pressed against his ears, filling his mind with a weight that was almost physical. He lowered the pendant to the device, letting the engraved insignia touch the polished metal. The room seemed to inhale, the shadows pulling back slightly as the hum softened, then rose again with new cadence. Patterns on the consoles shifted, but this time they arranged themselves into sequences he almost recognized, coordinates, names, and symbols that spoke of missions, betrayals, and histories erased from memory. It was an archive of secrets that had never been meant to exist. Arlon felt a tremor in the air. It was subtle at first, a vibration under his feet, then stronger, thrumming through the chamber with the power of something alive. The light column pulsed in response, widening into a halo that cut the shadows sharply. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. A sound came from above, soft and deliberate. Footsteps. The shadow stirred at the stairwell. He could not see it fully, but the movement betrayed intelligence, purpose, and patience. It was waiting for a signal, waiting for him to take the step that would tip the balance. Arlon's mind raced. Every plan he had ever made, every mission he had ever executed, had prepared him for strategy, for combat, for survival. But nothing had prepared him for this quiet tension, for the power of a machine that demanded a decision without revealing its consequence. It required courage measured against intuition, faith measured against fear. He inhaled slowly, feeling the weight of years pressing on him. The faces of those he had lost, the promises made and broken, all threading into a singular moment. The shadow at the stairwell moved again, a mere fraction closer. A presence felt, but unseen, like a pulse in the periphery of thought. The device reacted to his hesitation, the light beginning to expand slowly, almost imperceptibly, like a tide approaching a shoreline. Arlon could feel heat radiating from the metal, warmth that contradicted the cold sterility of the room. The pendant hummed in his hand, vibrating softly, resonating with the device as if acknowledging him. He raised his eyes to the shadow, straining to find a shape, a face, a sign of life. Nothing emerged, only the shifting black of the corner, the subtle sway of cloth that could have been air. The moment stretched, the shadow neither revealing nor retreating, the light neither exploding nor dimming. Arlon's heartbeat became a drum in the stillness, a steady count against the endless waiting. Every instinct told him that the next action would change everything. Yet the device, the shadow, and the valley itself seemed to pause in perfect balance, suspended in a calm that was impossible in such a charged place. He lifted his hand toward the light, toward the edge where the unknown waited. The pendant hung from his fingers like a key, yet the lock remained hidden. The hum of the machine rose, pressing against the walls, against his lungs, against the very air he breathed. And then, without warning, the room held its breath. The shadow froze completely. The light stopped expanding. The hum leveled into a vibration that seemed to fill every molecule of space. Even time itself seemed to pause. Arlon's hand trembled above the device, poised for a moment that would never arrive. The chamber waited. The valley waited. The truth, concealed within the device, waited. And the shadow remained just beyond the stairwell, silent, patient, knowing, watching. Arlon exhaled slowly, though the tension did not leave him. Every fiber of his being was alert, ready, yet nothing moved. The choice remained his. The moment stretched into infinity, and the answer, as tantalizing as it was necessary, never came. The device pulsed once more, a single wave of light, and then held itself in perfect stillness. It waited for a decision that would never arrive, leaving Arlon alone with anticipation, uncertainty, and the weight of all that could follow. And the valley around him seemed to whisper, in a language older than war, older than memory, that the story had only just begun. Arlon lowered his hand slowly from the edge of the device, letting the pendant rest against his palm. The light column remained steady, its glow softening into a quiet hum that filled the chamber without overwhelming it. The shadow at the stairwell did not move. It had not revealed itself, yet it no longer felt threatening. It had been a test, a sentinel watching the first steps of a mission that could reshape everything. He took a deep breath, feeling the tension drain from his shoulders in slow, measured waves. The room smelled of metal and dust, yet beneath it lay a subtle warmth, as if the valley itself acknowledged his presence. Arlon realized that the device was not simply a machine. It was a reckoning. It held the power to expose truths, to rewrite narratives, and to demand courage. And he had survived its first judgment. He stepped back from the circular structure, letting the glow of the light wash over him without touching it directly. Every instinct told him that leaving now was wise, that patience might serve him better than force. Yet he could not leave the pendant behind. He slipped it into his pocket, feeling its weight anchor him with purpose. The shadow at the stairwell remained, but now it seemed almost like a companion in silence. It had watched, tested, and waited, but it did not pursue. Arlon understood, without a single word exchange, that some mysteries must be approached carefully, in their own time. He turned slowly, retracing his steps through the ruined chamber, the stairwell, the narrow corridor. Outside, the valley was no less desolate, no less quiet. Yet there was a subtle change, a sense of possibility, of momentum moving forward in a place that had once felt frozen. The first step of Operation Iron Resolve had been taken. The mission had begun. Arlon paused at the ridge where the wind whipped cold against his face. The broken horizon stretched endlessly, holding both danger and opportunity within its folds. He knew the valley would not remain silent forever. The shadow would return. The device would call again, and the truths it contained would demand answers he was only beginning to understand. He exhaled, letting the air fill his lungs as the sun dipped lower behind the jagged skyline. For now, there was a moment of calm, a fragile pause between what had been and what was coming. Arlon turned his gaze forward, knowing that every choice from this point would carry weight beyond measure. And with that, he stepped away from the ruin, leaving behind the light that had tested him, yet carrying its knowledge deep within himself. The valley whispered in the evening wind, a sound that promised the story was far from over. The truth waited, patient and relentless. And Captain Arlon Hayes would be ready. The operation had begun, and the world would feel its resolve.